Now, for some reflection on South Africa's fight against gender-based violence, I'm now joined by Wise for Africa Director, Advocate Brenda Madumise. Advocate, thank you so much for your time and for joining us this afternoon. Now, we've seen a number of cases, especially coming out of the KZN province, with the latest being on Christmas, where we woke up to a woman who had been allegedly murdered by her boyfriend. What do you believe are the primary factors that are contributing to this continuous rise in GBV cases, and how have societal attitudes as well as economic conditions influenced this issue?
Good afternoon, Katlego, and thanks for having me, and to all the viewers. Listen, I think we all know, and when I say all, I'm referring to South Africans, that we have released a national strategic plan that sets out the primary drivers of gender violence in this country, right? It tells us exactly what you've just referred to. Alcohol is a contributor. Economic stability and instability, it's a factor. Patriarchy, it's a factor. Substance abuse is a factor. All of those contribute to the high levels and incidences of gendered violence in this country. Now, how do we stem it when you have it happening at an intimate partner level, right? It happens at home, it happens where partners stay together. What do you do when you can't police that act at home, right? It's a question of how do we look and view women first and foremost, right? So if you go back to the commentary that happened when the killing of Katlego was, the young woman Katlego from KZN was publicized through a video by the perpetrator, who was her ex-boyfriend. And the commentary that came out was many men, most of them, saying they would have done the same. That should be worrying, right? Second is, when you look at the HSRC study, which is the Human Science Research Council, was that over 60% of South African men believe that women must obey them. So when you have that combination of men believing that women want to exercise control over women, women must obey them. Once you don't obey him in the way that he believes that you should treat him or communicate with him, they're bound to be violent, and the violent is brutal. So we have a lot to work on the attitudes, on the normalization of violence in this country, the minimization of women's lived experiences when they tell us that they have been subject of physical violence at the hands of their partners, because that's the highest everywhere in the world. Intimate partner violence is the highest.
So, Advocate, where do we start? I mean, you make mention of the NSP, and South Africa has got a tendency of having beautiful and colorful documents, but the implementation thereof quite often is a problem. But like you say, you can't police this within people's homes. So where should we even start in changing those attitudes that you make mention of?
So the starting is everywhere. So we can't focus just on justice and criminal justice system in the absence of doing hard work on prevention, right? We can't focus on prevention without looking at leadership and accountability, because if you don't have leadership and accountability in all its facets, and leadership, we're talking about those in political leadership, those who are in church leadership, those who are in trade union leadership, those who are in corporate leadership, that once we don't demonstrate that leadership at that level, and we don't hold those who violate others accountable, it's not going to help us to focus on prevention strategies and interventions. It's not going to help us to have as many laws that we have to try and stem this problem. It's not going to help us if we don't to have care and support of victims when we are not looking at all of it. So all of the 6 pillars that you find in the NSP are intertwined and interrelated. So you must, at all times, work on all of them at the same time.
And I can imagine, I mean, you make mention of churches and other civil society organizations. I mean, what role do support services such as shelters and counseling play, especially with helping survivors of GBV? And how can these services be improved or expanded? I mean, we know we had the GBV command center that was down for the longest time. What places do we need to put in place in order for us to ensure that GBV victims are given the necessary help that they need?
So, I mean, providing a shelter is crucial because most women would stay in an abusive relationship because they've got nowhere to go, right? They are not financially independent. So they stay in an abusive relationships. But if you have these support structures and systems in place, they at least they know that they can live and find solace in a shelter. So those shelters must be supported. What we have been doing in this country is that we have not been giving the attention and the requisite resources to these shelters that are providing crucial service when it's needed, right? And the second thing is that the command center, I mean, it's a travesty because that command center is it's a lifeline to many victims of gender violence. And when it's not working, it literally puts all these victims at risk. So for the Department of Social Development, we take it that they have addressed the problem and that the command center is working so that the referrals that were being taken through the command center are happening and women can receive the assistance that they require.
Are there specific pockets within our society and even geographically in terms of provinces where we are seeing more of an uptake in terms of where GBV happens, especially when it comes to intimate partner violence?
So the South African Police Service themselves a year or two ago gave us the hotspots on gender-based violence. So if you look at the areas that were seen as hotspots by South African Police Service, it was KZN, the Inanda area, it was Eastern Cape, Lusikisiki, and then you've got Gauteng, right? So those three provinces came out on top in as far as the police are concerned. If you look at the HSRC prevalence study on gender-based violence, is that it's happening everywhere, right? In all the provinces, right? So what you need to look at is how. So when you have all these studies that are coming out, including the police's own stats, what are the appropriate interventions for that specific province that you need to be attended to, and what kind of support services? And we have been talking about this as WISE, that we have not done a mapping exercise for each province to understand what is available and how all these entities and institutions that are found in a particular province, how are they working together? How are they collaborating? At the moment, there's no collaboration, right? Precisely because we work in silos, right? And we have been advocating for a multi-sectoral collaboration at a national level, but specifically at a provincial level, so that you understand how you bring in a provincial approach and strategy to address the violence in your respective province.
Lastly, Advocate, I mean, speaking of that strategy, what is your long-term vision for a GBV-free society, and what steps do you think are necessary to achieve this vision?
So the vision is that we have men of character and men who can acknowledge their privilege, can acknowledge their power and what they do with that power, and that is power that they use for good, not for destruction. That they do not believe that by having power and control over a woman gives them their manhood is elevated. So we're looking at a society that accepts that women are. And I want to emphasize, because for the longest of time, we look at women as secondary citizens, right? And that's why we treat them the way we do. And so the sooner we accept that women are human beings and they've got agency and they have the right to live like any other, it will be better for men to acknowledge that and appreciate it, and stop bringing custom and traditions and practices to diminish and to violate women using culture and tradition as an excuse. So for me, what I would like to see is at some point a society and a group of part of society, being men, being comfortable that women are not a threat to them, and in fact we can coexist and coexist with respect, and instead of thinking that by showing me love you have to violate me and be violent towards me. We also need to work on women in understanding their value, and that once their value is taken away from them, they can walk away from a situation and protect themselves and thrive, and not place more importance on a relationship and thinking that they are not worthy. And so it's finding ways where these two genders can coexist and coexist with respect, and appreciating that we are different, and that until such time you understand that I'm a human being too, that I'm a woman, it does not detract and cannot give you the right to violate me at any given time.
All right, Advocate, thank you so much for your time and for your inputs. We certainly still do have a very long way to go as a society in curbing GBV. That's Advocate Brenda Madumise, who is the director at Wise for Africa.